Silent battlefields, where historic photos whisper the untold stories of war and human memory. A victim of the 1945 atomic bomb explosion in Japan has horrific burns in the shape of a nuclear burn pattern. The wounds trace the exact shadow of the kimono the victim was wearing at the moment of terror. The intense heat and radiation from the explosion imprinted the fabric's pattern onto his body, turning his skin into a painful replica of his clothes. The scene is both horrifying and haunting, revealing the inhumanity of nuclear weapons. During the Leipzig massacre, a political prisoner collapsed against a barbed wire fence, his body charred and bleeding after being shot in the head. He and hundreds of Poles, French, Russians, and Czechs were imprisoned in Stalag Tekla, where the SS doused the camp with flammable liquid and set it on fire with bazookas. As the flames raged, anyone who tried to escape was machine-gunned down. 350 innocent lives were burned and slaughtered in that horrific nightmare. At Belsen concentration camp in 1945, after its liberation by the Allies, German civilians were forced to witness and participate in the cleanup of the horrific atrocities. Under gunfire and bayonet watch, they collected the emaciated bodies of prisoners, leaving them scattered across the campgrounds. Their faces, frightened and terrified, reflected the stark reality they had previously tried to ignore. The scene became a painful reminder of silence in the face of atrocities. In the Belsen concentration camp, 31-year-old Margit Schwartz, a Jew from Budapest, was a pale shadow of life. Her body was in pain, so thin that it was skin and bones. Her mind was hazy and broken. Even though she was almost insane and had to be fed and turned over by nurses, she still had an extraordinary moment. She struggled to stand up from her bed, her trembling hands holding onto the iron frame, recreating almost exactly the appearance of an old photograph, the last meaningful memento in her fragmented memory. In May 1945, during the brutal Battle of Okinawa, U.S. Marines advanced through a devastated village, reduced to rubble and devastation by bombs and shells. Amid the devastation, the lifeless body of a Japanese soldier lay on the ground, a tragic symbol of sacrifice and despair. The image reflected not only the brutality of the battle, but also the brutal price borne by both sides in World War II. Jacqueline Cochran, 1906 to 1980, a pioneering American pilot, is recognized as one of the greatest female racing pilots, setting numerous aviation records and becoming the first woman to break the sound barrier on May 18, 1953. During World War II, she served as a leader of the Women's Air Service Pilots, WASP. Before the U.S. entered the war, Cochran worked with the British Air Transport Auxiliary, ATA, transporting American aircraft to Britain. She was also the first woman to fly a Lockheed Hudson V bomber across the Atlantic. On June 1, 1941, at RAF Duxford, England, Cochran was photographed chatting with female members of the Royal Canadian Air Force, next to a Hawker Hurricane Mki-2B of 242 Squadron. Nurses, air raid prevention workers, and rescue workers tend to injured hospital patients, waiting on stretchers to be taken to nearby hospitals after an air raid by a Nazi German Vergeltungswaffe Fiesler Fi-103 V1 Doodlebug bomber that hit Lewisham Hospital on the 26th of July, 1944, in London, England. Although it looked as if Georges Blind, the man facing a barrage of German rifles in this photograph, was about to be executed, it was all a lie. The Germans were merely trying to extract information from Blind, a member of the French resistance. When Blind refused to reveal their intentions, the guns were lowered, and he was instead sent to a concentration camp, where he died almost immediately. With seemingly endless bombing campaigns reducing cities to rubble, those fortunate enough not to see combat live in constant fear of death. Pictured above are British schoolchildren taking part in an air raid drill. Neither the wooden desks nor the way they position their hands would offer much protection if hit by a German bomb. In this iconic photograph, British prisoner of war Horace Greeley stares down one of the Nazi Party's leading figures, Heinrich Himmler. Here, Himmler is touring one of the many active German prisoner of war camps. He was the leader of the Nazis' notorious SS and the chief overseer of the concentration camps that systematically murdered millions of people. The Battle of Narva, February 2nd to August 10th, 1944, was one of the fiercest and bloodiest battles on the Eastern Front, with a total of 550,000 casualties. Located on the Narva Isthmus, the strategic Estonian enclave became a fierce flashpoint between Nazi Germany, reinforced by Estonian volunteer units, and Stalin's Soviet Red Army. Both sides understood that whoever controlled Narva would hold the door to the Baltic. The battle was divided into two major phases: the Narva Bridge and the Battle of the Tannenberg Line, where shells, tanks, and blood mixed in close combat of unprecedented ferocity. Villages around Narva were flattened, the sky reddened by relentless artillery fire. Despite a series of Red Army attacks, the Germans stubbornly held on until Hitler was forced to withdraw from Estonia in August 1944. The Battle of Narva was not only a tragedy of hundreds of thousands of lives, but also a symbol of the despair of two exhausted powers in the throes of war. The Battle of France, May 10th to June 25th, 1940, was a lightning nightmare that stunned Europe and marked the abrupt end of the phenomenal war, the first quiet period of World War II. In less than 2 months, 469,000 soldiers were killed or wounded, and one of the most powerful armies in the world at the time, the French army, completely collapsed. On May 10, 1940, Nazi Germany launched a lightning offensive through the Ardennes forest, which the Allies believed was impassable for tanks. Using blitzkrieg tactics, lightning warfare, the German army poured across the border, broke through the defense lines, and advanced straight to Paris with a speed that shocked the world. Although the two sides were nearly evenly matched, the French army was paralyzed by poor communications, chaotic command, and a false belief in the Maginot Line. By the end of June, a swastika flag was flying over Paris, a symbol of one of the most humiliating defeats in European military history. The Battle of France not only changed the course of the war, but also ushered in a dark period for the entire continent. The Siege of Berlin, April 16th to May 2nd, 1945, was the fiery end of World War II in Europe, where blood, smoke, and ashes mingled with the collapse of the Nazi Empire. With more than 1.29 million casualties, this was the final and bloodiest battle on the Eastern Front. After breaking through the Oder River defense line, the Soviet Red Army advanced like a storm, wiping out all remaining resistance, approaching Berlin at a speed of 40 kilometers per day. When only 56 kilometers from the German capital, 3 Soviet forces simultaneously launched a full-scale attack from the east and south, destroying pockets of resistance, while the northern wing crushed the last German defense line. The sound of cannons echoed through the ruined streets, and Red Army tanks roared into the heart of the dying empire. Hitler holed up in his bunker, watching his dream of hegemony crumble to ashes, before taking his own life on April 30th, 1945. On the same day, the red flag of the Soviet Union flew over the German parliament building, Reichstag, symbolizing the victory of the Allies and the end of the fascist nightmare. Of course, the vast majority of deaths in World War II occurred on the battlefield or in concentration camps, But there were other ways to die as well. As the war began to draw to an inevitable end, and it became clear that the Allies would win, many German officials, such as Ernst Lissow, chose suicide rather than face almost certain execution by the Allies for their war crimes. With seemingly endless bombing campaigns reducing cities to rubble, those fortunate enough not to see combat live in constant fear of death. Pictured above are British schoolchildren taking part in an air raid drill. Neither the wooden desks nor the way they position their hands would offer much protection if hit by a German bomb. While most schoolchildren cowered under their desks during air raids, adults who were out during a terrorist attack often had to run to the nearest tube station to minimize their risk of death. Like these Londoners during a German air raid, while the tube offered a relatively high level of protection, those who took shelter there could still be confined to their new tube homes for days, with bombs occasionally penetrating shallower parts of the station. In February 1942, in Singapore, Britain's impregnable citadel in the Far East, British, Australian, and Indian soldiers were forced to surrender to the Japanese army after days of fierce fighting. In their mud-stained uniforms, they silently bowed their heads before the enemy's guns. This event marked the most humiliating defeat in British military history, with more than 80,000 soldiers taken prisoner, and paved the way for Japan to control all of Southeast Asia at the height of World War II. In the final days of World War II, Hitler desperately relied on the fledgling youth force from the Hitler Youth, turning them into reluctant soldiers on the bloody battlefield. In the photo, he appears with a cold gaze, gently touching the face of a boy who had just been awarded a medal, as if to instill blind faith in them. These young faces, not yet 20 years old, were caught up in the vortex of propaganda, becoming human shields for a regime about to collapse. This is a tragic testament to the exploitation of youth in the frenzy of war. The Battle of Moscow, October 2, 1941 to January 7, 1942, was one of the greatest turning points of World War II, with a total of 1 million casualties. In the autumn of 1941, Hitler threw the full might of the Wehrmacht into Operation Typhoon, firmly believing that the capture of Moscow would crush the Soviet spirit and force Stalin to surrender. Millions of German troops and thousands of tanks rushed towards the capital, destroying everything in their path. But they did not expect that the Soviet Red Army would fight to the end, turning each village and each street into an impregnable fortress. As the harsh winter set in, temperatures dropped below -30 degrees Celsius. German tanks froze, guns stopped, and soldiers collapsed in the blizzard. In contrast, the Soviet army, reinforced by Siberian divisions experienced in fighting in the cold, launched a fierce counterattack, pushing the Germans back from the gates of the capital. Moscow did not fall, and Hitler's fleeting dream melted into ice. The Battle of Moscow not only saved the Soviet Union from the brink of destruction, but also lit up hope for the entire world that was plunged into the darkness of fascism. German 4-layer 80-centimeter caliber Schwerer Gustav supergun. Movie actress Ida Lupino is a lieutenant in the Women's Ambulance and Defense Corps and is shown at a telephone switchboard in Brentwood, California on January 3, 1942. In an emergency, she can reach every ambulance post in the city. It is in her house, and from here, she can see the whole Los Angeles area. A resistance girl is part of a patrol to hunt down remaining German snipers in areas of Paris, France, on August 29, 1944. She had killed 2 Germans during fighting in Paris 2 days earlier. When the war broke out, the I-16 was the Soviet Union's main fighter. It was the first high-speed monoplane with retractable landing gear. The Il-2 attack aircraft was one of the most effective fighting machines of World War II. The first version had a single seat, The Il-2M version had 2 seats. While awaiting assignment to permanent field units, these Army nurses underwent gas mask drills as part of several additional training courses held at the hospital training area of the Provisional Headquarters somewhere in Wales on the 26th of May, 1944. The Red Army's T-26 tanks became obsolete by 1941. However, these old tanks were still effective in stopping the German advance on Moscow. During World War II, the image of Rosie the Riveter in the United States symbolized the great role of women in the wartime economy. However, compared to the United States, the Soviet Union mobilized women much more. Not only participating in weapons factories, Soviet women also directly wore the uniform of the Red Army, a rare thing in other countries. More than 1 million people served in the Army, mainly in logistics, medical, and transport positions. Notably, about 100,000 women fought on the front lines, becoming snipers, pilots, tank soldiers, or frontline infantry. This is a strong testament to the extraordinary contribution and strength of women in this life-and-death war. The La-5 KB Lavochkin was one of the best fighters of the Soviet Air Force. The La-5 fought on par with Nazi Germany's Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs. The Battle of Luzon, January 9th to August 15th, 1945, was one of the fiercest and bloodiest campaigns in the Pacific, with an estimated total of 332,000 to 345,000 casualties. The island of Luzon, the largest and most important of the Philippines, held a strategic position vital to the U.S. military in its plan to retake the Pacific. After months of waiting, in early 1945, General Douglas MacArthur, who had vowed, "I will return," finally fulfilled his promise with a massive amphibious landing on Luzon. The battle quickly turned into a living hell as the Japanese desperately fought back at all costs, including using kamikaze pilots to crash into U.S. warships. By February 11th, the U.S. had captured the capital, Manila, but the city had been severely devastated, with tens of thousands of civilians killed in the sea of fire. Despite the main force being defeated, the remaining Japanese troops still held out in the mountains and forests, conducting sporadic counterattacks that lasted for many months. Luzon became a symbol of the brutality, bravery, and terrible price that both sides paid in the final days of World War II. The Second Battle of Kharkov, May 12 to May 28, 1942, was one of the bloodiest tragedies of the Soviet Red Army in World War II. The city of Kharkov, Ukraine's leading industrial and strategic center, fell to Nazi Germany in the fall of 1941. Determined to regain this land, the Soviet Union launched a large-scale attack in May 1942 in the hope of turning the tide of the battle. However, they did not expect that the German army still had terrible latent power, along with the ability to counterattack sophisticatedly and brutally. In less than 2 weeks, 3 Soviet armies were surrounded and destroyed. More than 280,000 soldiers and 650 tanks were completely wiped out. The sky of Kharkov was filled with smoke and bullets. The ground turned into a giant cemetery. The battle ended in a major disaster for the Soviet Union and became a bitter lesson in strategic errors, but also a painful stepping stone for the growth of the Red Army in the following years. The Battle of Kursk, July 5th to August 23, 1943, is considered the largest tank battle in human history and the decisive turning point on the Eastern Front of World War II. After the disastrous defeat at Stalingrad, Hitler recklessly launched an operation to wipe out the Kursk salient, the protruding territory controlled by the Soviet Union, in the hope of regaining the initiative. But the Red Army had anticipated every move of Germany thanks to its excellent intelligence system, and prepared a defense line up to 185 kilometers deep. dense with minefields, obstacles, and anti-tank fire points. When the operation began on July 5, 1943, thousands of tanks roared into each other in a sea of fire and gunpowder smoke, creating an unprecedented scene of horror. After more than a month of fierce fighting, the German forces were exhausted, counterattacked, and forced into a defensive position. 388,000 casualties were the bloody price they had to pay. Kursk buried Hitler's last hope in the east, and from here, the balance of war tilted towards the Soviet Union, opening the way for a counteroffensive to sweep fascism from Europe. Three young women, Janice Cooper, Marilyn Connor, and Gloria Ellickson, attracted all eyes while sunbathing at Steeplechase Park on Coney Island, New York, in the 1940s. What was special was that they wore unique swimsuits made from World War II Air Force escape maps, a meaningful gift from their pilot boyfriends. The image was both sexy, daring, and full of wartime imprints of a turbulent period. Although World War II caused countless forms of destruction, the devastation caused by the atomic bomb, nicknamed Little Boy, dropped on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, was the most catastrophic. United States officials debated whether to use the bomb. Ultimately, they justified its use on the grounds that it was a necessary evil, as well as the fact that if they did not drop such a devastating device, the Japanese would continue to fight to the last man, ultimately leading to more death and destruction. After the bomb was dropped, approximately 12.2 square kilometers, 4.7 square miles, of Hiroshima City were destroyed, with buildings reduced to irreparable rubble. The force of the explosion also immediately caused a series of fierce fires, quickly burning down any houses that were lucky enough to remain standing. Although World War I was technically the first major war fought in the industrial age, World War II brought with it a much more powerful array of weapons. These modern guns, tanks, and explosives were deafening to both the users and the recipients, and many soldiers suffered permanent hearing loss as a result. Due to the indiscriminate and sustained nature of much of the bombing during World War II, even those who tried their best to find shelter at the beginning of a raid often failed to act quickly enough. Such was the case with the passengers on this London bus. The introduction of the American gas mask in combat. To protect troops from chemical attacks, the United States issued gas masks widely. Training ensured that soldiers could quickly put on masks when attacked. This protective device saved many lives in the mustard gas environment. Masks became an essential part of combat gear. Their use marked a new era in chemical warfare defense. In the midst of the fierce World War II, women in WAC uniforms stand at attention and salute the motherland, their eyes blazing, proud, and indomitable. They do not hold guns in the trenches, but are still brave warriors in the rear, keeping the heartbeat of an America burning with patriotism. In 1943, they officially became part of the United States Army, an eternal symbol of strength and silent sacrifice. Amid the dust of war in London, a female member of the Motor Transport Training Corps is bent over changing a tire at the ARP station in Lambeth. Without makeup or fear of dirt, she grips the heavy tire with a determined gaze, a symbol of the steely spirit of women in wartime. In the sirens and shadows of war, she remains steadfast, proving that strength does not belong only to men. Milan, 1945. Amid the ruins of buildings and the echoes of gunfire, Italian guerrillas rose to reclaim their freedom. Their clothes were tattered, their weapons were crude, but their eyes burned with determination. They were not trained soldiers, but workers, farmers, students, people who turned despair into strength. When the fascists fell, Milan was not only liberated, but also witnessed the moment when people conquered their own fears. Amidst the bustle of a United Service Organization (USO) event circa 1943, a woman in a bikini gracefully walks among the ranks of smiling and amused American servicemen. Performances and entertainment like this were organized by the USO to ease the war fatigues, bringing joy and optimism to American soldiers serving in World War II. The Battle of the Bulge, December 16, 1944, January 25, 1945. Also known as the Battle of the Bulge, was the last desperate counteroffensive of Nazi Germany on the Western Front of World War II. With the ambition of dividing the Allies, capturing the port of Antwerp and turning the tide of the war, Hitler threw more than 200,000 troops and thousands of tanks into the frozen Ardennes forest of Belgium. This lightning attack stunned the Allies, creating a terrible shock in the cold winter of 1944. But when the surprise wore off, the Allies' logistical strength and fighting spirit quickly turned the tide. After more than a month of bloody fighting, the Ardennes campaign collapsed completely, leaving more than 186,000 casualties and turning the last hope of Nazi Germany into ashes. The Battle of the Bulge not only marked the end of Hitler's dream, but also paved the way for the fall of Berlin just months later. The Battle of Monte Cassino, January 17th to May 18th, 1944, was one of the bloodiest and fiercest confrontations of World War II, with an estimated total of 185,000 casualties. Located in the rugged mountains of southern Italy, this place became a solid fortress of the German-Italian coalition, blocking the Allied advance on the road to Rome. During the 4 months of fighting, every hill and every wall of the ancient monastery of Monte Cassino was eroded by bombs and blood. The Allies' goal was to break through the Gustav Line, the German defense line considered impregnable, to open the way to liberate the capital Rome. When the smoke and fire subsided, the Allies finally won. But that victory came at a terrible price, with tens of thousands of soldiers falling, and an ancient monastery thousands of years old being leveled in a sea of fire. Monte Cassino is forever remembered as a symbol of resilience, but also a deep wound in human history. Amidst the bustle of a United Service Organization (USO) event circa 1943, a woman in a bikini gracefully walks among the ranks of smiling and amused American servicemen. Performances and entertainment like this were organized by the USO to ease the war fatigues, bringing joy and optimism to American soldiers serving in World War II. The Battle of Stalingrad, August 23, 1942. February 2, 1943, was the greatest turning point of World War II, and also one of the bloodiest tragedies in human history, with a total of 1,798,619 casualties. With ambitions to dominate the Eastern Front, Hitler ordered the capture of Stalingrad at all costs, believing that controlling the city named after Stalin would be the decisive blow to the Soviet Union. But Stalingrad quickly turned into a living hell. Every street, every house, even every basement became a battlefield. The Soviet Red Army fought to the last breath, while the German army was tightly surrounded in the harsh winter, suffering from hunger, cold, and incessant shelling. When the siege closed, more than 300,000 German soldiers were trapped, and most never returned. The defeat at Stalingrad was not only a fatal military blow, but also a crushing blow to the spirit of the entire Nazi Empire. From the ruins of Stalingrad, the Soviet Union rose strongly, and the wheel of victory began to turn, bringing the war to a fiery and bloody end for Nazi Germany. In the dimly lit train station, a sailor hurriedly gave his lover a passionate farewell kiss before the train rolled away. The girl stood on tiptoe, hugging him tightly through the train window, as if holding on to the last bit of warmth in the short moment. All around, silent eyes watched, filled with sympathy. The photo captured not only a farewell kiss, but also a symbol of love, sacrifice, and the pain of separation in war, where every encounter could be the last.